She was a queen at just 6 days old. A princess raised in luxury, promised crowns, kingdoms, and a glorious destiny. But her fate would not be written in gold. It would be written in blood. This is the tragic story of Mary, Queen of Scots, the woman who lived as a queen, loved as a queen but died as a prisoner. When Mary Stuart was born on December 8, 1542, Scotland was already trembling. Her father, King James V, had just lost a humiliating battle against England. Broken and sick, he died 6 days later, leaving his infant daughter the throne. Mary became queen before she could even open her eyes fully. Imagine that, the crown before cradle songs. From the start, Mary was not just Scotland's child, but a pawn on Europe's chessboard. She was betrothed, bargained, and bartered between great powers. Henry VIII of England wanted her for his young son, Prince Edward. A marriage would unite the crowns of England and Scotland, but the Scots resisted. Instead, her guardians looked to France, ancient ally of Scotland and sworn enemy of England. So at the age of 5, little Mary was shipped across the sea to France. Picture the scene, the cold gray shores of Scotland fading as her ship sailed south, carrying with it the hopes of a nation. At the glittering French court, Mary was not just welcomed, she was celebrated. She was tall, graceful, with auburn hair and striking features. Educated in languages, music, and statecraft, she quickly became a jewel of the Valois dynasty. At 16, she married the French Dauphin, Francis, heir to the French throne. It seemed like destiny had smiled on her. She was now Queen of Scotland by birth and Queen of France by marriage, a double crown. But fate is a cruel playwright. Francis died young after only 2 years as king. Mary, widowed at 18, was left in a court that no longer had room for her. She was sent back to Scotland, a queen without a king, returning to a land she barely knew. Scotland in 1561 was not the peaceful country of her childhood fairy tales. It was torn by religious conflict, Catholic against Protestant, noble against noble. Mary was Catholic, raised in France, elegant, cultured, almost foreign in her own kingdom. Yet she tried. She rode out on horseback to meet her subjects. She negotiated with lords. She even charmed many with her wit and presence. But Scotland was not easy to rule. Still, Mary knew she needed an heir. And in 1565, she married Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, her cousin. At first, it looked like a royal love match. He was handsome, tall, with royal blood. But soon the dream curdled. Darnley was arrogant, violent, and drunk more often than sober. Worst of all, he resented Mary's power. The marriage spiraled into scandal. Darnley demanded the crown matrimonial, equal rule as king. Mary refused. Their fights became public. Then came the night that shattered everything. In 1566, Darnley and a group of conspirators burst into Mary's chambers while she was heavily pregnant. Before her eyes, they stabbed her secretary and close friend, David Rizzio, more than 50 times. His blood stained the floor as Mary, terrified, was held at dagger point. She never forgave Darnley. And yet, only months later, she gave birth to a son, James, the future king of both Scotland and, one day, England. It should have been Mary's triumph, but fate had another twist. By early 1567, Darnley was found dead, strangled in a garden. House after an explosion destroyed the building. Suspicion immediately fell on Mary and her rumored lover. James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell. Whether guilty or not, Mary's enemies seized the moment. Bothwell abducted her, some say by force, some say by consent, and within weeks she married him. To her enemies, it looked like confession in all but words. Scotland erupted. Nobles turned against her. Armies rose. Mary and Bothwell faced them at Carberry Hill. She surrendered. He fled. She would never see freedom again. In July 1567, Mary was imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle and forced to abdicate the throne in favor of her 1-year-old son. James VI, imagine the humiliation. A queen giving up her crown while her baby became king. Bothwell, once her protector or perhaps captor, vanished into exile and madness. Mary escaped Loch Leven once. In 1568, she raised an army, but defeat followed quickly. Desperate, she fled south into England, seeking protection from her cousin, Elizabeth. But Elizabeth saw not a cousin, not a victim, but a threat. Mary had a strong claim to the English throne. To Catholics, she was the rightful queen, while Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn, was seen by many as illegitimate. Elizabeth welcomed Mary not as a guest but as a prisoner. What began as protective custody stretched into 19 long years of captivity. 19 years of castles and manors turned into gilded cages. 19 years of plotting, hoping, despairing. Mary wrote letters. She played the role of the wronged queen. She waited. But waiting was not enough. In the shadows, Catholic plots brewed across England and Europe to rescue Mary, to depose Elizabeth, to restore Catholic rule. Some plots Mary may have encouraged, some she may not have even known. But in Elizabeth's eyes, every whisper, every letter, every plan became proof that Mary was too dangerous to live. For 19 years she waited. For 19 years she woke each morning behind locked doors. A queen without a throne, a prisoner wrapped in velvet chains. But in the end, Mary Stuart would not die forgotten in silence. She would die on a scaffold, in front of witnesses, as a warning to all who dared to dream of crowns. Mary's imprisonment in England began with a promise. Elizabeth claimed she would consider her cousin's plight, investigate her innocence in Darnley's murder, and perhaps restore her to the Scottish throne. But Elizabeth was clever. She knew the truth of power. To free Mary was to invite rebellion. To send her abroad was to give France or Spain a weapon. And so Mary stayed, first at Carlisle Castle, then at Bolton, Tutbury, Sheffield, and a long list of other fortresses. These were not dungeons. Mary had her ladies, her gowns, her books. She hunted with falcons, embroidered with silk, and wrote letters endlessly. But make no mistake, she was a prisoner. Guards shadowed her walks. Letters were opened. Visitors were vetted. Every smile was observed, every sigh recorded. For Elizabeth, it was a perfect solution. So long as Mary lived quietly, she could be a bargaining chip in European politics. But Mary was not quiet. She could not be. She was a queen in exile, and queens do not fade politely. Plots swirled around her like moths to flame. Catholic Europe, Spain, the Pope, France all saw in Mary a rightful Catholic queen, waiting to replace Elizabeth. The Northern Rebellion of 1569, the Ridolfi Plot of 1571, whispers in every tavern and court, "Free Mary, overthrow Elizabeth." Elizabeth grew harsher. Mary's freedom shrank. Her letters were monitored, her movements restricted. But even within chains, Mary played the game. She wrote to kings, to nobles, to her supporters abroad. She reminded them she was the granddaughter of Henry VII, the true heir of England, unlike Elizabeth, whose mother Anne Boleyn had been disgraced and executed. To Catholics, Elizabeth was a bastard. Mary was their hope. Years turned into decades. Imagine 19 winters, 19 birthdays, 19 springs passing behind stone walls. Her youth faded, her health declined. She suffered from rheumatism, stomach pains, depression, but still she dreamed of freedom. Then came the plot that sealed her fate. In 1586, a young Catholic named Anthony Babington and his conspirators hatched a plan to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne. They smuggled letters to Mary, hidden in beer barrels. In these secret notes, Mary appeared to consent. She wrote words of encouragement, words that Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, was waiting for. For months, Walsingham had been watching, setting the trap. When Mary's letter was discovered, it was the final proof Elizabeth needed. A trial was arranged. Mary, now 44, was summoned to Fotheringhay Castle. For the first time in her life, she faced judges not as a queen, but as an accused traitor. She had no lawyer, no defense, no jury of peers. She stood alone, a widowed, weary woman against dozens of hostile lords. Yet she spoke with dignity. She denied plotting Elizabeth's death. She reminded them she was a sovereign queen, answerable only to God, not to English law. She said, "I am a queen, the daughter of a king. My place is not here." But her words fell on deaf ears. The verdict was already written. Elizabeth hesitated. To kill a queen was to commit an unthinkable act. Kings and queens were divinely chosen, a Tutbury to execute. One was to set a dangerous precedent. But Elizabeth was cornered. Catholic plots were everywhere. Spain threatened invasion. Her advisors urged her to act. And so, after weeks of delay, Elizabeth signed the death warrant. On February 7, 1587, Mary was told she would die the next morning. She received the news calmly. She prayed, wrote farewell letters to her friends and to her son James in Scotland. In one, she begged him not to seek revenge, but to trust in God's justice. The next morning, February 8th, she dressed carefully, always theatrical, always aware of symbols. Mary wore a gown of black velvet, but beneath it, she hid a crimson petticoat, the color of martyrdom in the Catholic Church. If Elizabeth meant to kill her as a traitor, Mary meant to die as a Catholic martyr. At 9 o'clock, she was led into the great hall of Fotheringhay Castle. Around 300 spectators waited, nobles, sheriffs, guards, and officials. At the center stood the scaffold, draped in black. With the executioner waiting beside his axe, Mary walked with steady steps, leaning on two of her ladies. She climbed the steps, smiled faintly at the crowd, and knelt to pray. She declared her innocence once more. She prayed for Elizabeth, calling her "my sister," and then she prepared herself. Her ladies helped her remove her black gown. Gasps rippled through the hall as the crimson beneath was revealed. The executioner stepped forward. Mary knelt, placed her head on the block, and spread out her arms. The first blow struck her neck but did not sever it. A groan filled the hall. The second blow nearly finished it, but not cleanly. Only after a third strike was the head severed. When the executioner held it aloft, the lips were said to still move, whispering prayers. Her little dog, hidden in her skirts, ran out whimpering, refusing to leave her body. Mary, Queen of Scots, was 44 years old. She had been a queen in Scotland, a queen in France, a prisoner in England, and now a martyr in death. Elizabeth was shaken by the news. She claimed she had not meant for the warrant to be carried out so quickly, that her secretaries had acted without her command. Perhaps it was political theater, perhaps guilt, but the deed was done. Mary's body was buried at Peterborough Cathedral. But years later, her son James, once the infant king she had been forced to abandon, had her remains moved to Westminster Abbey. She now rests in a grand tomb, only a few steps away from Elizabeth herself, the cousin who condemned her. And so history wrote its irony. Mary's son James VI of Scotland became James I of England after Elizabeth's death in 1603, uniting the two crowns at last. The dream Mary had once carried, the vision that cost her her freedom and her life, was fulfilled, not through her but through her blood. Her story is not one of victory but of endurance. She was betrayed, imprisoned, executed, yet in the end her line prevailed. The Stuart dynasty ruled England for a century after Elizabeth was gone. Mary lost her life, but her legacy outlived her executioner's axe.